welcome back to another episode of the Cardboard Herald, my chance to talk with creative gamers and game creators. And today I am joined by Jennifer Graham-Macht of Keymaster Games. Welcome to the show, Jennifer.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, you are having quite the start to 2020. I mean, you have, Parks Nightfall, you have Parks Memories, you have Running Iron, you have Firebreak. Like, you have a lot of projects going on at Keymaster. You guys are popping off. What's going on over there?
Well, we're staying busy. We have a ton of creative ideas bouncing around our team, and a lot of cool people that we're working with from outside our team, like Henry Audubon, who's the designer for Running Iron, Charlie Hoops, who's the designer for Firebreak, and we're really excited to keep working with those projects and get them out to the public.
Well, I'm going to dive into them because I know people are really excited about it, especially because when this video goes live, people will have just heard about Parks Memories, but I want to get kind of like a baseline for you and Keymaster for those not acquainted with you. So when did you first get into games, and when did that lead you on your trail, so to speak, if we're talking about parks, over to Keymaster Games?
Yeah, so I, like a lot of people in this hobby, got my start very young. I was trained in the ways of Risk at a really young age, and I can attribute that to some family members who didn't pull any punches. We'll say that.
Good for them.
Between that and, playing Scrabble with a bunch of adults as a kid, there's just, you learn the hard way, I guess. But it toughened me up and gave me some resilience. And then I have to say that, there was a period where, kind of in my teen years, where it's sort of kind of scattered experience. But then I started dating the lady who is now my wife. And one of the dates we went on was to Barnes & Noble, where we used to love to go in the kids section. We like to go read picture books. And we ended up in the game section, and I studied art history in college. So we ended up in the game section, and I saw Fresco on the shelf. And I had never seen, this is just that sort of experience that I think hobby gamers have, where they realize that there's games about things that they also think are cool. And they're like, hey, this other thing that I like is now in this board game, so I'll try it out. And I was like, well, we have to find out more about that. And we bought it and took it home and spent all night learning how to play. And I don't know, like some of your listeners might not be super familiar with Fresco. Fresco is not the most difficult game in the world to learn how to play.
Yeah. But I mean, everyone has that experience, right? Where you get your first hobby game and you're like, oh my God, this is the biggest. I remember the first time I played Small World, and I thought that was like the most complicated board game that I had ever even dreamed of. Like, that was bananas. And now I'm like, Small World, that light thing?
Yeah, exactly. Totally the same. It's just super overwhelming. We stayed up most of the night learning how to play it, just completely enamored with it. And I remember the next morning we woke up and immediately started playing it again. And I remember that was a really big deal because it was the World Cup. And France was in the semifinals playing against Italy, which was a hugely competitive match. And I didn't want to really watch the match. I really just wanted to play Fresco. So I was basically hooked from there. I couldn't get enough of board games, and just like everybody else's story, there was no amount of time that was too short to think about or find out more about board games. And I was basically hooked from that point on.
I can honestly say that you're the first person who has said that their gateway was Fresco. So that's a unique thing just to you that you can hold on to. It's super cool. But how did this lead to actually working in the industry? I mean, you said you studied art history in college. Yeah. So what kind of bonkers trajectory is that?
A really, I guess a really strange. So I studied art history. I ended up, so I was working for an artist as an apprentice, an artist apprentice, and a frame. He's also a framer, so custom framing. So if you need any custom framing done, I know a little bit about that too.
But will it work if I'm in Alaska and have to send it down to you?
Look, it really is just about the amount of money that you want to pay.
There
That's
we
what
go.
you're willing to talk about. So I went from the art history thing. I ended up starting to work for Apple after that. And I met my downstairs neighbor. His name was Colin Burke. And we he got me super passionate about comics, which was something I had never been into before. And we came up with this scheme. We started going to comic shops weekly together and came up with this scheme to open a game store. We just kind of took a leap of faith, and I ended up opening a game shop that I had for just about 4 years before selling. It was just one of those going kind of where your heart leads you and where passion dictates that you have to travel. Those paths less taken. I know it sounds a little cheesy and corny, but that's how it got started. And while I had the shop offered me opportunities to travel to conventions, to meet with content creators, publishers, hobby gamers, really, right above and beyond the people making the games, the people who love playing them. It's incredible to be a shop owner and get to not only share that passion with all those people, but sometimes instill it. Like, it's a really magical experience. So open the shop, but I had been kind of pulled away from my family for a little while, just like any business, and I applaud everybody who is in business for themselves. That it is no easy task, but decided to sell to spend a little more time with my family. So I sold the shop and did some consulting and ended up kind of connecting with Keymaster, who I had fallen in love with while I owned the shop, had loved selling their products in my store. And we just aligned actually because of the art piece. Because I saw Keymaster as a company that was doing something that no other company I stand by. No, I don't think any other company is really doing it quite what Keymaster is doing when it comes to art. And I don't say that to put anybody else down. There are plenty of companies out there whose art and product design I love, but Keymaster is truly special in the passion that they're bringing to the table and the talent that they're bringing to the table with their product design.
So did you just like show up at the door and you're like, yo, hire me because we are going to figure this stuff out?
I mean, so I came on in August of 2018, and at that point, the Keymaster had plenty of successful Kickstarters under their belt, and I pitched myself. We joke about it, but I kind of did show up at their door and say, hire me. I said, I was like, I love what you're doing, and I would take anything. Like a total lease, like I'll scrub the toilets if I have to be a part of this team, be a part of what you're doing, because I see what you're doing and it's amazing. And if that is something you need to help, then I'm here for it.
I got to make a quick aside here because there's too much filtering in that just has connectivity to me here. The scrubbing toilets, the comic shop, the game shop. So when I was 16, I was hired to work at Bosco's Cards and Comics in Eagle River, Alaska, which is like an institution here in Alaska. Well, the Anchorage branch, the Eagle River branch closed down. Anyway, I had been lurking at the shop, a typical loiterer since I was like 6 years old. And then I got old enough. They're like, sure, of course, you can have a job. And then first day, they're like, yo, you need to clean that bathroom spick and span because you need to learn that working at the shop is not just sitting around and reading comic books all day. And yep. It's the kind of dedication that you have to something that you love that even if it means cleaning the bathrooms, that you get to be part of a crew that you really care about, immersed in a culture that you really care about, that even that sounds really gratifying. And, I can really dig that. Anyway, I totally interrupted your story there.
No. And that's exactly the vibe that Keymaster presents, that the team presents. So it's a team of 4 people, including myself. You've got Kyle Key, the founder, Maddox Schuler, who's creative director, and Matt Aiken, who's the operations guy. All 3 of them are co-owners. And they have a really great friendship that they bring to the table, but also a passion and drive that's infectious. It makes me want to work harder all the time, but they're also just really great people, and that sort of cohesiveness and that sort of jointness in the team, I think, is super important for any kind of small company to have to work hard at the level we're kind of growing to, without just completely expanding the team, drastically, or being able to do that quite yet. But also keeping it fun and remembering that we're here to, make things that make people smile.
For sure. And let's talk about those things that make people smile. I mean, one thing is, of course, going to be those upcoming games that we mentioned right at the top of the interview. But Parks itself, so that way we kind of understand its relationship to the upcoming expansion and this spin-off game in the same Parks universe. I mean, that's a weird thing to say, because that's like our universe.
But not. I know.
But describe what the project was that resulted in Parks.
Yeah, so the beginning of 2018, the 59 Parks actually reached out to say, hey, I think they had played Campy Creatures, and like they loved the aesthetic. They saw the design, the graphic design, the illustration work that was there, and the presentation that was there, and they were like, hey, we have this series, and we'd love to consider working with you. And coincidentally, Kyle and Maddox and Matt, to a certain extent at that point, were all like, I mean, yeah, we love your work. 59 Parks up to that point, I think they're sort of like similarly aged, if I'm remembering correctly, to Keymaster. I've been touring with these amazing illustrations, this amazing print series that's commissioned from artists, amazingly talented artists from all over the world. And that's just a completely separate conversation about like how the cohesiveness of Parks works because of these. It's really because of these artists and because of the art direction of JP Boneyard, who's a member, who's the founder of the 59 Parks print series. So there was just sort of this instant friendship or connection because of those two things. And at the time, Keymaster had just wrapped up working with, or just started, was in Kickstarter for Space Park with Henry Audubon. And we asked, or they asked him to come on and do some development and design work, kind of commissioning him to design a game or an idea for this, to see, if we could make a go of it. So they did, and it was, like it underwent. We probably worked on it for a year. They were working on it for 8 months, and I came on that August, and I was also part of development afterwards, like from that point until Kickstarter. So there was a good year and 3 months of design and development on the project, and we hit Kickstarter in February, and I think the rest is kind of history.
Yeah, well, I mean, it is still an ongoing story, because it's one of those games that I'm on the subreddit for board games, and I see people saying like, oh man, I'm waiting for them to restock Parks, or like, oh geez, has anyone seen Parks, or hey, PAX Unplugged, they're going to have Parks available there. Like, it is something that people are still really excited about and discovering, and congratulations on all that success. And that's why we're here, really, is because you are now spinning off into other directions. So let's start with the first announced thing, which was the expansion, Nightfall. Sure. I mean, of course, we're going to get into what is this thing, but the burning question that everyone has, including myself, is how am I going to fit this into the box with that gorgeous insert? What are you doing to us?
Yes. Yes, that has been a question that's come up a bunch since we announced it. And yes, the expansion is going to get its own fancy box. And it will not fit in that base game box, because we made that super compact. We did that pretty intentionally with that box design, and I think everybody can expect to see that same intentionality behind the expansion. But this isn't, this is a living product, so success breeds more, right? People have asked a lot about if there's going to be a bigger box or something like that, and that's probably something that'll be visited a little bit further down the road. But for this expansion, where you can definitely expect a high quality box design and thoughtfulness.
So one of the fears that people have with expansions are that it might come out feeling like it's just tacked on or wasn't really cohesive or organic with the original concept of the game. And I think that fear may be particularly amplified with Parks because of that very cohesion, the svelte nature of the game, where every piece feels like it's necessary to the whole, but never more than what the whole needed in the first place. So how do you expand upon that? Like, what is the pitch, the purpose of Nightfall?
That's a totally great question, and it's definitely something that we encountered as we were looking to expand. Is this idea that there's this pretty neatly tied up package, and where do you go from there? I think we have some pretty fun ideas in the works. The first thing, and the number one part that's important to Nightfall, is that we're finishing the National Parks collection. So those park cards are going to have celebrate all of the national parks now. It's not that artwork hadn't been created yet for all of the national parks, including some of the new parks like Indiana Dunes, or what is it, White Dunes. Right, there's two from 2019. They hadn't been made national parks yet, and now they are, and they also have artwork for them. So we're really excited to be bringing that artwork and filling out that national parks deck. But we're not just filling out that national parks deck. There's a really, we realize that in those cards, there's an opportunity to explore different ways to visit, to pay resources to visit these national parks. Mm-hmm. So we're exploring different opportunities when you go to visit there, like how can you re-engage with your engine building or set collecting while you're visiting those parks. The second thing that it does is we are completely redoing the year cards. Oh. It's something that we saw a lot of feedback on, and we agree with, and we want to be open and listen to player feedback and give people opportunities to say, hey, this is we heard from a lot of people that year cards was a space that they really wish there was more opportunity for success in. Right. And so that's what we're working to provide with year-end bonus cards. So there'll be a deck that completely replaces your existing year deck, and those goals will be more open-ended. So instead of kind of finite the way that and like two-tiered the way they are now, there'll be more opportunities to grow points or have those year-end bonus points kind of rack up or accumulate if you're able to generate those successes.
Will there be any different locations that you can stop on through the trail, like the trail tiles themselves, that will, I guess, create divergent gameplay from game to game to game? Because right now, you do have different mixes that are going to come up, and that does add replayability, but inevitably you'll see every trail location in any given game.
So the trail is something that's a great question, and it's something in our development sessions that we've talked about a lot is this idea that like there's so many important things, and that if you were, like you have these advanced tiles, and if you remove an advanced tile because let's say we just compound the advanced tiles so that there's some that might not ever show up in a game. Well, the trail's not as simple as that, because the system and the arc of the game is actually really dependent on seeing each of those actions, even if they come up in a semi-random order. So what we're going to be looking at is, and this is where I'm a little bit limited because I want to save a little bit for surprise, is what we're calling it the camping mechanic, and it's that idea of staying behind after dark and getting to experience the trail through this different mechanic, which I think people are really going to enjoy. Without necessarily ruining or altering that in a drastic way. We're really interested in exploring what different trail options look like and what that possibility looks like. So it's not something that we're reinvestigating the trail in a different way. But that idea that you're talking about is something that's definitely come up, and we're also looking at for the future.
Now, will this allow me to do citizens arrests and then severely punish NPCs who, I don't know, say leave their trash bags at campsites because, oh my god, people are monsters sometimes?
They can be, yeah. We still think that being largely optimistic is the best approach,
I think so too.
and trying to breed good behavior, more so than the antagonistic citizens arrest. But but we'll definitely keep it. I'm not closing the door on it yet.
Expansion number 2.
That's right.
Well, let's talk about this other Parks game that you have in development, because this is brand new information. So what is Parks Memories? Like, how did this come to be that you were going to create the Parks board game-matic universe?
Honestly, completely by surprise, as our most creative endeavors. They just kind of happen, and you've got to be open to running with it. And again, kudos to a team who's sure-sighted enough that they can see a thing they've got to run with when they do. So Parks Memories is a game designed by Kyle Key, who's the Keymaster founder, and it is a strategic matching game. It'll come in 3 sets, and it's a completely different way to experience the national parks and the beautiful illustrations of the 59 Parks print series. We're fortunate that they also they wanted to continue working with us. We've loved working with them, and this is just more stuff that we get to make with them, and we're really excited. But it's also not just stuff. It's actually a really fun, thinky, strategic, surprisingly strategic game that plays very quickly. It's a 2+ player game with a variety of play, and it is a matching game. So there's tiles in the game that are the national park cards, these illustrations, and each set will have 22 of the parks. Altogether, between the 3 sets, all parks will be represented again. And what happens is there's 3 stacks, and you create a board of a 3x3 grid on the table, and they're all face down, and you flip them up. You flip up 2 at a time, trying to match, but you're not just matching for the illustrations. You're trying to match for resources, and matching an illustration actually means you won't match a resource. The reason it's important to match resources is because you have abilities. Players activate abilities in front of them, so they can ready and then use them and spend them. And those abilities give you ways to tinker with this system of trying to remember and manipulating the board, and also trying to collect 3 sets of illustrations before your opponent does, or opponents. So it's like a really fast pace, and while it sounds super lightweight, the gameplay and the interaction is so surprising. Like, every time I sit down to play it, still I'm like, my brain, I walk away with a little brain burn, because I think I've got a new strategy that I'm ready to use, and I am always surprised that that there's still stuff for me to learn, and something that seems somewhat straightforward. And what's extra nice about it is that because it's a matching game, we want something that's accessible, that's lightweight, that comes in at a slightly lower price point for some people, that's also accessible to like an even younger audience, right? Mm-hmm. So there's these abilities that you can play with, but like if you are a family and you've got a little kid, like a 4 or 5 year olds, that you're looking to experience, park illustrations on nice tile that you can't rip necessarily, that still come with park facts. If you want to teach your 4-year-old about park facts,
you don't know my 4-year-old. He can rip just about anything.
Okay, that's fair. We'll take that into consideration with our final prototype pieces from Panda. But it gives you a lighter, a lower entry point for those different age brackets.
I know that, like with any board game small business, Keymaster must have everyone wearing a lot of hats. And even though you're doing media contacts and interviews like this, you must wear a development hat. And so being involved in the process, witnessing Parks Memories come to life, like, what has been the most challenging hurdle getting up to this point, preparing for launching the Kickstarter? Is it that there was something that was part of the design that was a major hurdle that you had to get over, or was it making sure that components could meet the right price point? Like, you know, what was an obstacle that people might be surprised about as you were gearing up for this?
That's a great question. I think that uh, there are a lot of hurdles, but you're right. There's a lot of support systems along the way, and it's not just actually inside the team, but it's from everybody else, right? The industry people talk to each other, and it's really great to have friends to bounce ideas off of, to lend support, to be like, hey, just I know you're in Kickstarter prep. This is something we just experienced. Those are really awesome interactions that I love. I think one of the things that we always hit is our own level or bar for how we measure success or correctness. We want everything to be beautiful. We want everything to be top notch in how it's presented to our Kickstarter backers, to our customers, to the hobby community, to this national park community, which is, you know, now we're super excited to be able to have a product that helps bring some of those people kind of into the fold, right? And sometimes we struggle to want to have things be so perfect that we have to kind of move the needle a little bit, and push ideas forward. So that's always that can sometimes be a challenge, but it's a great challenge because it always brings us in to help us even further solidify where that standard is, where that bar of excellence is.
Right.
You know, where the minimum is, which happens to be kind of very high. That threshold is actually really, really high. So it's like a challenge, but it's sort of healthy for us. Sometimes it gets in our way and makes for long days, but it's also what helps us stand out too. So it ends up being, you know, like that's what people love us for.
Well, I want to make sure that we're at least touching on a couple of the other projects that are coming up. I know that time is short and we have definitely things to focus on here, but first off, you have Running Iron, which is another Henry Audubon game that is a cooperative Western game that's coming out. I'm going to have up very soon, maybe before the release of this interview, maybe shortly after a first look that we did at PAX Unplugged. And it's a very compelling game that I think actually at first glance it may not seem like it has a shared lineage, like thought process lineage with Parks, but once I got playing it, I was like, okay, I'm picking up on what Henry Audubon is here, and there are certain echoes of how one may arrive at this being the same designer as Parks. But what is like the coolest thing about this game, the thing that you are most excited about, that you want people to be aware of as you approach for it, and when is this thing going to be available to people? Is it Kickstarter? Is it going to go direct to retail? Tell us about it.
So personally, the thing I'm really, really excited to be able to share more of is the artwork. I love the art in Running Iron. It's actually from a female artist. It's our first female artist that we're working with. Yes, we've worked with. There's commissioned artists who are commissioned female artists from the 59 Parks print series for Parks, but it's also it's a little bit different. This is somebody that we were reached out to specifically, and she did a great job of bringing fun characters to life, and I can't wait to share more of that. And I think it's just a totally different experience. Like it's something that's gonna I think people are gonna enjoy that. It's gonna feel aesthetically and quality wise like a Keymaster game. It's going through graphic design work right now from Maddox, which is where it takes a first pass and then we continue developing it for that user experience piece. So it kind of bounces back and forth as it approaches that those final development stages. But it's going to feel I think it's totally different than any other game that we've put out on the table before. and I like that you note those subtleties of similarity for Henry, but I also think that this is him. It breaks out of a little bit of a shell and explores something with like a high randomness, right? Because there's dice in it. You're
Right,
chucking
right.
dice. It's a dice chucker. It's a cooperative dice chucker. You're trying to rob a train, and there's something whimsical about that. But also, these characters have this kind of meaningfulness to them that's really engaging. I'm excited to share.
Yeah, well, the diversity that feels purposeful with the characters, like their character designs, they don't feel randomly selected in order to account for diversity. They feel like characters who belong in the story that the game presents. And you were mentioning that it's a little whimsical, it's a dice chucker, but there's a ton of randomness mitigation in that. There's a ton of real thoughtful design into how the asymmetric powers interact. It is a very thoughtful dice chucker, even though it seems like a very straightforward and approachable game, which I guess that thoughtfulness is maybe the biggest similarity and the cohesion of it. And just having a really cool aesthetic as you build up the player powers and have the tableau reveal the ultimate tapestry of that character's housing, or I guess locale. That illustration aspect was so cool when he was showing that to me. He was so proud of it. Like, it was great sitting down with him at PAX Unplugged. And you have another game that's coming out.
Yeah, so then there's also Firebreak, which is in the work. It's in development, and we're really excited to keep developing it. We had a prototype at PAX Unplugged that we started showing off to people to give people a feeling of this cooperative game about fighting wildfires that Charlie Hoops has created and we've brought on. And that's just actively in development. We're actually really excited to be talking with some wildland firefighters coming up soon, just to hone in on what characters look like. And these are things that we're just going to actively continue to tell people about, like projects that we have in progress that we're working on really like honing in on and nailing down. And releasing them when we think they're really locked in and feel good.
Well, what's fascinating and also tragic is that this is timely with everything that's going on with the wildfires in Australia right now. And has any of that circulating around the news and people's public reaction to that and the actual firefighting that's going on, has any of that affected the development of the game? Like, as this has become less of an abstract theme for a game and more a reality that you're capturing, even if it's not the specific setting.
Yeah, I think it's definitely it's something that we've watched and I've kind of felt a personal engagement with in the sense that I think it's a game and you want people to have fun and you want people to sit down and be able to kind of think critically and to a certain extent remove themselves from those experiences. But on the other hand, you want them to feel invested. And it just reinforces that the decisions that we want people to make, we want them to be invested in the decision making because it is, for better or for worse, that's the theme of the game. And it's a really interesting, engaging game. It's a hard game. So, I think people are going to really enjoy playing it and really want to play it. And it's making sure that there's that value piece where we're towing that line, which is pretty challenging between, this is a game and this is talking about something that's very real and very relevant to a lot of people.
Well, I know that you had your own reasons and assumptions about Keymaster as you were seeking out your employment with them after your game shop ownership days. And I know that 2019 in particular was a huge year with the release of Parks, and now you have all these projects that are in development. And here in 2020, there are so many game companies that are doing really incredible work, that are coming up with some absolute bananas games that are setting themselves apart. But what do you want people to think of when they think of Keymaster? Like, what are you doing in order to make sure that you're set apart? Because there's a lot of competition out there. There's a lot of beautiful games out there. There's a lot of thoughtful games out there. What is it that you feel like makes Keymaster so special?
So Keymaster was above and beyond anything else, founded from by Kyle, with this idea that games bring people to the table. They bring family and friends to the table. And the number one thing a game can serve to do is bring people together for experiences. Keymaster is setting itself apart by creating and incentivizing with the packaging, with the quality of the components, with the accessibility of the games, with the time, honestly, that a game stays on the table. A game doesn't need to stay on the table for we love playing long games. We love playing long games. I love heavy games. I'll take a heavy game any day. But games that stay on the table for, like an hour-ish, kind of capping out, right? But give people that experience and that time and the freedom to talk with each other and amongst each other, and really just bringing people together, giving people an excuse. And if making a beautiful game that's quick to play, it helps someone, give someone an excuse to sit down and spend 15 or 20 or half an hour or an hour with somebody else face to face, then we have succeeded. It doesn't matter if they, really understood the game or scored the highest amount of points. It's that they took that time with each other
and had an incredibly visceral reaction to the game in such a positive way. Like, I'm going to end this by saying that for me, having grown up in Alaska, and I've lived in lots of different places in the world. I was born in the Philippines. I've lived in New Delhi, India, and Alaska for me has something special that is a little bit ephemeral and hard to put my finger on. And I'm sure people have that relationship with the place that they grew up in, but to see something like Kenai Fjords rendered in a game with enough honesty that it captures kind of the spirit of a certain vista, but at the same time it's artistically interpreted in specific ways. Like, I don't know that I've ever had an emotional reaction to a game in the way that I have with Parks. And whether that's a one-off thing that is just true of that game and there are different reactions that will come with other games, or whether that's true to the spirit of Keymaster that you guys really honed into with that specific game, you guys accomplished something truly special that I think will be a significant footnote in tabletop gaming history for many, many years to come. So thank you so much for coming on to this show, and thank you for making Parks and for giving us so much to look forward to in 2020.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that memory and for having me. I really enjoyed our conversation.
If you enjoyed this video, we have all kinds of other reviews, interviews, and recommendations via writing, podcasts, and video here on our channel and website, cardboardherald.com. Our content is audience supported, so if you want to show your support, please visit our Patreon. Thank you so much for watching. This has been the Cardboard Herald.